The darkness crept in like a living entity, seeping into the pores of the old town like a chill. It was as if the very fabric of reality had grown tired, exhausted from the weight of its own despair. The streets, once bustling with life, now lay empty, the silence punctuated only by the distant hum of a solitary street lamp. Amidst this desolate landscape, a lone figure emerged. Dr. Emma Taylor, a renowned psychologist, stepped out of the mist-shrouded night, her eyes fixed on the crumbling facade of Ravenswood Manor. The once grand estate loomed before her, its turrets reaching towards the moon like skeletal fingers. Emma's footsteps echoed through the stillness as she approached the entrance, the heavy wooden door creaking in protest as she pushed it open. A shiver coursed down her spine as she stepped across the threshold, the air inside thick with the stench of decay and rot. The interior was a labyrinth of dusty corridors, cobweb-shrouded portraits, and forgotten memories. Emma's gaze wandered, drawn to the grand staircase, its intricately carved banister now worn smooth by the touch of countless hands. The silence was oppressive, heavy with the weight of secrets and forgotten nightmares. She began her ascent, the creaking of the stairs beneath her feet the only sound in the oppressive quiet. The higher she climbed, the more the shadows seemed to deepen, as if the darkness itself was watching her, waiting for her to uncover the secrets that Ravenswood Manor held within its crumbling walls. The air grew thick with an unspeakable malevolence, each step heavier than the last, as if she was being pulled towards some unknown horror. On the top floor, a door at the far end of the corridor seemed to draw her attention, its surface scratched and scored as if by the frantic hand of a madman. Emma's skin crawled as she reached out to grasp the cold metal doorknob, the sound of her own ragged breathing the only accompaniment to the oppressive silence. The door creaked open, surrendering to her hesitant pressure, and Emma stepped across the threshold into a realm of madness. The room was a shrine to the deranged, walls papered with cryptic symbols, and cryptic messages scrawled in a hand that seemed to twist and writhe like a living serpent. At the room's center, a figure sat, shrouded in shadows, its presence seeming to fill the space with an unspeakable horror. Emma's eyes were drawn to the figure, her heart pounding in anticipation of some unspeakable revelation. The air was heavy with the stench of rot and corruption, as if the very soul of Ravenswood Manor had begun to putrefy. The figure, sensing her gaze, slowly raised its head, the features obscured by darkness. Emma's breath caught in her throat as the figure's face, deathly pale and corpse-like, began to take shape, its eyes, two black voids, sucking the light from the room, fixing her with an unblinking stare. Emma's heart raced, her mind reeling as the figure's gaze wrapped around her like a cold, dead shroud. Time itself seemed to compress, the moment stretching out into an eternity as the figure's face, pale and waxy, drew closer. Emma's vision began to blur, the symbols on the walls seeming to shift and writhe like living serpents, as if the very fabric of reality was unraveling before her eyes. The figure's mouth, a thin, lipless slit, curled into a grotesque parody of a smile, revealing teeth stained yellow with age and decay. Emma's breath came in short, shallow gasps as the figure's cold, dead eyes seemed to bore into her very soul. And then, in a movement that seemed almost imperceptible, the figure's head cocked to one side, its gaze never wavering from hers. The silence was oppressive, the air heavy with an unspeakable horror, as if the very presence of the figure was a blasphemy against the natural order. A single, dry whisper seemed to caress Emma's ear, the sound sending shivers down her spine as the figure's voice, like the rustling of dry leaves, spoke a single, chilling word: "Welcome!" The room began to close in around her, the shadows deepening, as if the darkness itself was alive and hungry. Emma's heart raced, her mind reeling, as she realized she was trapped in a living nightmare, with no escape from the horrors that Ravenswood Manor held. Within its crumbling walls, the figure's gaze, unblinking and cold, drew her in, a macabre fascination that repelled even as it attracted. Emma's thoughts reeled, her grip on reality tenuous, as she struggled to comprehend the horror that sat before her. The figure's smile, a twisted mockery of humanity, seemed to grow, its lips curling upwards in a grotesque, inhuman grin. Emma's breath caught in her throat as the figure's eyes, black as coal, seemed to fill with an otherworldly intelligence, a malevolent consciousness that pierced her very soul. The air, heavy with the stench of decay, seemed to thicken, becoming almost palpable. Emma's skin crawled as the figure's presence, like a cold, dark mist, enveloped her, suffocating her with an unspeakable horror. And then, in a movement that seemed almost serpentine, the figure's head began to lean forward, its cold, dead eyes never leaving hers. Emma's heart raced, her senses screaming in terror, as the figure's face, a death's mask of pale, waxy skin, drew closer, its cold, dead breath whispering a single, chilling word in her ear. "You!" The room, already dim, seemed to darken further, as if the very light itself was being consumed by the horror that sat before her. Emma's world narrowed to a single, awful reality. She was trapped, alone and defenseless, in a realm of unutterable horror, with no escape from the abyss that yawned before her. Should, the figure's voice, a dry, rustling whisper, seemed to caress Emma's ear, the sound sending shivers down her spine. "You should not have come here." The words, spoken with an unholy intimacy, seemed to crawl under her skin, infesting her mind with a creeping sense of dread. Emma's thoughts reeled, her mind stumbling to comprehend the malevolent presence that sat before her. The figure's face, a macabre death's mask, drew closer, its cold, dead breath washing over her like a wave of darkness. Emma's heart raced, her pulse pounding in her ears, as the figure's eyes, black as the abyss, seemed to bore into her very soul. "You should not have meddled in things you do not understand," the figure whispered, its voice like a sigh from the grave. "You should not have disturbed the balance." Emma's mind, reeling with terror, struggled to comprehend the figure's words. What balance? What horror had she unleashed by coming to Ravenswood Manor? The figure's gaze, unblinking and cold, seemed to pierce her very soul. Emma's vision began to blur, the room darkening, as if the very fabric of reality was unraveling before her eyes. And then, in a movement that seemed almost impossible, the figure's face, a twisted mockery of humanity, began to stretch, its skin pulling taut, like parchment stretched over a drum, its features elongating, like a reflection in a funhouse mirror, as the figure's mouth, a thin, lipless slit, began to open, revealing a void of darkness that seemed to suck the very light from the room. Emma's screams, silent in her mind, were drowned out by the sound of her own heart pounding in her ears, as she stared into the abyss of the figure's mouth, her vision tunneling, darkness closing in from all sides. The air, heavy with the stench of decay, grew colder, the shadows deepening, as if the very presence of the figure was a blasphemy against the natural order. Emma's thoughts, jumbled and incoherent, stumbled to comprehend the horror that sat before her. The figure's eyes, black as coal, seemed to fill with an unspeakable malevolence. As it leaned forward, its cold, dead breath washing over her like a wave of darkness, Emma's world, already shrunk to a single, awful reality, began to dissolve, her grip on sanity tenuous, as the figure's presence consumed her. In the darkness, a single terrible thought echoed through Emma's mind. She was not alone in the room. There were others, lurking just out of sight, waiting for their moment to strike. The figure, a mere puppet, was just the beginning of the horror that Ravenswood Manor held within its crumbling walls.